Number 24 on WTBC survey the week of July 18th, 1973, Carole King, Believe in Humanity. It's from her album called Fantasy, which didn't do as well as Tapestry and some of her previous albums, but fondly remembered by many of her fans. Produced by Lou Adler. The album was produced by Lou Adler. Lou Adler, who produced Mamas and the Papas in the 60s, it was him who arranged those strings lovingly around the group's vocals. Or it might have been Bones Howe, the engineer, but either way, I saw her again last night. One of the most lovely records that ever came out of the 60s, produced by Lou Adler. California Dreaming, Monday Monday, Words of Love, all produced by Lou Adler. You read about the history of rock and roll in the 60s. He even managed Jan and Dean. Worked with Jan and Dean in the early 60s. You read about the history of rock and roll, you're going to run into Lou Adler's name. But by the early 70s, he was producing hit albums by Carole King. He produced Tapestry. And he produced this album, Fantasy. One of the great records off this album was I can't pronounce the word correctly. Corazon. It was put out as a single late in 73. It didn't make top 40, but boy, what a lovely record. It was in Spanish. Actually, the word Corazon was Spanish for heart. That was off that album by Carole King. Carole King, Believe in Humanity. Sort of a counterculture thing. It's almost like an ambivalence. It's somebody looking back at the counterculture years. Late 60s, early 70s. It's almost like asking, was it really worth it being a flower child? My God, Nixon started withdrawing the troops in Vietnam in 1969, but we were still in the war for 4 years. 4 more years. Thousands of more casualties. Sweeping social change across the American landscape, across the world. Late 60s, early 70s. The counterculture, the message song still lingered in the summer of 73. There was another one that was a brilliant record. God, one of my favorites. TBC also played this one too earlier that summer. Albert Hammond's Free Electric Band. The same guy who did It Never Rains in Southern California. Free Electric Band was awesome. Fantastic record. A guy named Danny Krochmer played guitar on this album. On this record by Carole King, Believe in Humanity. Danny Krochmer was one of the biggest session musicians. This guy's got a resume. One of the biggest in-demand, called-for session musicians in the 70s and 80s. Started in the late 60s, started in the 60s. And he came out with a couple of albums of his own, but he's well known for working with people like, he played on Sweet Baby James. He played guitar on Sweet Baby James by James Taylor. He played on Tapestry by Carole King. He played on this album by Carole King. He played with Linda Ronstadt. He played on albums by Linda Ronstadt, Harry Nilsson. He wrote. Remember the song by Don Henley? He wrote All She Wants to Do Is Dance. He wrote that song. 1985. He also co-wrote Don Henley's Sunset Grill, that heavy synth record that came out in the mid-'80s. That was just brilliant. I get goosebumps every time I listen to that record, Sunset Grill by Don Henley. He co-wrote that, co-produced it too. That's just the tip of the iceberg on Danny Krochmer. I believe Krochmer, I believe is how you pronounce it. One other thing about Danny Krochmer. One other thing about this guy. He was in a band called Attitudes. And they put out a couple of albums. Another member of the Attitudes, David Foster, famed songwriter. Well, anyway, Danny Krochmer, he wrote, Honey, Don't Leave L.A. He wrote it. And when he was playing on sessions with James Taylor later on in the 70s, he said, hey, well, how would you like to record this song that I wrote? And James Taylor did. He recorded Honey, Don't Leave L.A. It was a minor hit for James Taylor, early 1978, but it was one of his most up-tempo records. Danny Krochmer later, he said he later regretted getting James Taylor to record that song because it's not his forte. But Taylor said, hey, I like doing this. I enjoyed recording the record. And the critics liked it too. Honey, Don't Leave L.A. written by Danny Krushmeyer. Played on this song by Carole King. I Want to Believe in Humanity. Number 24 on WTBC's Top 30 survey, July 18th, 1973.